Okay, so today we're going to dig into something pretty interesting. Those subtle, everyday habits that, according to psychology, might just tell you a little bit about someone's intelligence. Let's get right into it.
You know the type, right? We've all been there. You're in a conversation with someone who's just absolutely certain they're right. But the more they talk, the less sense any of it makes. It's kind of baffling, and let's be honest, it can be really frustrating.
Well, it turns out psychology tells us this isn't just someone being arrogant or stubborn. It's more like an iceberg. That confidence you see on the surface is just a small part of something much deeper going on with how they see the world. So let's look at what the research actually shows.
All right, so first up, we're diving into one of the most common and, frankly, misleading signs. It's all about that gap between how much someone thinks they know and, well, what they actually know.
So, sign number one is this really intense overconfidence that's just not backed up by anything real. They'll speak with total authority, but if you ask them to explain the reasoning, it just kind of falls apart. It's that classic case of not knowing enough to even realize how much they don't know.
And believe it or not, there's a scientific name for this, the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's this super fascinating glitch in our thinking. Just picture that amateur singer who is totally convinced they're the next superstar, but, can't quite hit the right notes. It turns out you need a certain amount of knowledge just to be able to judge your own skill accurately. And that overconfidence? Well, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's usually propped up by a whole other set of habits. These really rigid thinking patterns that just don't let any new information in.
One of the biggest signs of intelligence is just plain old curiosity. Truly smart people are always asking why. They want to know how things tick. So, on the flip side, a total lack of curiosity is a huge red flag. When someone just shuts down new ideas or even sees learning something new as a threat to their ego, they're basically closing the door on any kind of intellectual growth.
And when you're not curious, it's pretty easy to fall into this next trap, seeing the entire world in black and white. For some people, there's no middle ground, no shades of gray. Everything is either totally right or totally wrong, end of story.
Just look at the contrast here. On one side, you've got this thinking that's like a brick wall, totally inflexible. And on the other, you have thinking that's more like a river, It can move around obstacles and handle complexity. The world is almost never that simple, and a huge part of being intelligent is being able to deal with all that nuance.
And yep, there's a formal term for this too, cognitive rigidity. It's basically the exact opposite of being mentally flexible. So when someone with cognitive rigidity is faced with new proof, instead of changing their mind, they just dig their heels in even deeper.
Now, this kind of rigid thinking, it doesn't just stop with ideas. It's also really deeply connected to how we handle our emotions.
It's pretty fascinating, actually. Study after study shows this link between, say, lower cognitive ability and what we might call lower emotional intelligence. And this usually shows up as someone reacting really impulsively, getting offended at the drop of a hat, or just not being able to manage emotions like anger. So what's the smarter way to handle this? It's actually a super simple but really powerful three-step process. Instead of just reacting, you first pause, just for a second. Then you actually think about what's happening. And only then do you respond in a deliberate way. That tiny little bit of space you create makes all the difference in the world.
Okay, so this is where things can get really heated. These impulsive reactions often bubble to the surface when someone's ideas get challenged, which brings us to how people deal with blame and disagreement.
This one is huge. When something goes wrong in their life, do they start looking for a way to fix it? Or is their first instinct to find someone or something else to blame? Constantly pointing the finger at other people, at the system, at bad luck, is really just a way to avoid taking any responsibility for your own actions and problems. In psychology, they've got a name for this mindset. It's called an external locus of control. It's this core belief that you don't really have any control, that life just happens to you. And that kind of thinking just completely shuts down any chance for problem solving or growing as a person.
And finally, we have a really telling one, the complete inability to handle a different point of view. For some people, if you challenge their opinion, you're not just questioning an idea, you're launching a personal attack on them. They just can't separate the two.
So why does this happen? What's going on here? Well, it's usually a mix of a few things. They might genuinely mistake a logical challenge for a personal insult. But also, having a real, reasoned debate takes mental energy, And sometimes their beliefs are so wrapped up in who they are, in their identity, that an attack on their ideas feels like an attack on their very soul.
All right, let's tie all these threads together now with one last really powerful idea that kind of gets to the core of this whole thing.
Just let that sink in for a second. This one quote really gets to the heart of the matter, doesn't it? That lack of self-awareness might just be the biggest blind spot of them all. And that's the cruel twist, the paradox of it all. The very people who have these habits the most are, by definition, the absolute least likely to see those habits in themselves. That Dunning-Kruger effect we talked about comes full circle. They just don't have the self-awareness to see their own blind spots. But you know what's really encouraging? The simple fact that you're here, watching this, thinking about these ideas. That shows you have curiosity. It shows you're open to self-reflection, and that is one of the strongest signs of intellectual humility and a real desire to grow.
And that leaves us with the million-dollar question, right? Because this was never really about spotting these habits in other people, it's about looking in the mirror. So the most important takeaway is this. Now that you know these patterns exist, what are you going to do to actively challenge your own blind spots?